Yeah, I think if I started to talk about AI pipelines, I'll lose all of you here, right? It's 5 o'clock. I'm between you and your evening, right? So I really wanted to talk about some really basics. Several folks today here, including Dr. Janum and Dr. Ravi Balraman, reminded us that AI at the end of the day is just a tool, right? Uh, and to remind you of what tools can do or cannot do is an image there generated from DALI. It's a generative image tool by the not so open OpenAI, right? And as you see, what I was trying to get it to do was do a mosaic of bricks that somehow forms an image of AI, right? And it took me some time to master the tool, right? As you see here, I barely got an A, and kind of very unrealistic bricks there, right? And finally, it got me something, okay, you can see both A and I in this. So the point of this is that ultimately what your AI does depends on what Ravi said earlier. What do you want it to do to begin with? And all of that starts with data. And I wanted to just focus on some really basic practical considerations that I keep finding myself surprised that folks forget, right? Both technologists and doctors seem to forget. Maybe it's because we sometimes are just chasing novelty or papers, but I wanted to use this as an opportunity to remind ourselves. At some level, AI doesn't make any sense. I mean, it doesn't matter, right? It's not a silver bullet to anything. It only is useful if you are able to integrate it with systems in a way that is useful to you. If you're not able to do that, it's not useful, right? So yes, it may be inside some product. Yes, it may be embedded within some solution, but all that needs to work with your systems and your workflows, right? And everything flows from that. Now, this is a list of questions that at some point, I mean, I was one of the founders of Vadhvani AI, or Vadhvani Institute for Artificial Intelligence. And this was a list of questions I formulated along with Rahul, one of my co-founders. It used to be 7 questions. Now we made it 8 questions, right? First of all, what's the impact potential of the problem you're trying to solve? And what is the specific sub-problem you're trying to solve, right? And the specific is extremely important. We'll get into some details, right? Is AI even feasible? Is there any indication that the sort of AI you're looking to do using some XYZ data coming up with some prediction, ABC, is actually doable? Does it have any basis in science? And is it feasible at all in the workflows? And is there actually an AI necessity? This is something we forget. Earlier, I think, over breakfast, I think Santam was talking about the fact that, hey, there's HPV vaccination, right? That's going to take care of most of our cervical cancer issue. Should we still be doing that AI-based cervical cancer screening? Should we be publishing papers or putting money or creating data sets for that? Fair question, right? Systems view. So that kind of becomes really important, because you might give an amazing diagnosis, but let's say you don't have ways to close the loop, give treatment. Should we do it? This is a real chicken or egg thing. My perspective is that we acknowledge our problems only if we are able to measure it. So my perspective is, for important problems where we do not have the treatment options yet, access yet, it still is important to diagnose, screen, etc. That's my view, because it's, hey, we didn't want to test for COVID, right? Because once we counted them, we had to deal with it, right? So yeah, and I hope that's going to be bleeped in any video we put out, right? The acceptance with stakeholders. There are many stakeholders here, right? We talk about user centricity, users being our healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, etc. There's beneficiaries, but often the payers and choosers are also different, right? This is especially true in public health systems, right? So any number of government agencies might choose, and some philanthropic organization might pay for it. And ultimately, how are you going to get it to sustainability, right? Does the data exist, and can you bring it together at a reasonable cost or ease? Are there partners to co-create, pilot, iterate, fund? The iteration bit is extremely important. Can't tell you how disappointing it is to see lots of efforts that do not account for enough iteration at all, right? The reasons might be many, but that's so fundamental. And I'll also talk about that a little bit. And ultimately, programs and pathways to scale. Without programs and pathways to scale, again, this is very much my point of view. We are all shaped by our experiences. I am shaped by fair amount of trauma in seeing these wonderful things that people say, oh, I've built this great innovation, no one is using it, right? Well, does anyone owe it to you to use your innovation? Right? Sure, there is potential. I think it's important to really work with the programs that are already at scale, perhaps. Find ways, think about it ahead of time. For me, go-to-market starts at the beginning, not after you build something, right? So you still, after all this, you still believe it's worth collecting that data set. So let's get into some practical issues. Ultimately, this is, today I'm going to really talk about data and the purpose of data, but the big elephant in the room always is the resource and time constraints. That will decide a lot of what you do, right? And it's important to be humble about it, acknowledge it, and know what you're getting into. And it has a huge impact on the morale of teams regarding how far you get, if you're more realistic about what you're getting to, but at the same time, kind of have that ambition around purpose. Now, very broadly speaking, you build data sets for two things, right? This is somewhat of an artificial, separation. It's actually a spectrum. You either are discovering new patterns or associations, or building solutions exploiting somewhat known patterns and associations, right? Now, when you discover new patterns, that'll obviously go back to your data set, and that will change how your data set construction going forward is going to be. And even as you build solutions, you often realize that your AI scientists or data scientists said, oh, Raghu, 500 images are good. After getting 500 images, said, oh, we need another 10,000 more, right? That's something I've heard so many times, so don't be surprised, right? So expect this to be a highly iterative process. Let's dig a little deeper into the building solutions bit. Let's say you are focused not on exploratory research, but building solutions, right? The first thing I want to say is this, and this might upset folks here in the center of, what I say, an island of excellence, that is CMC Vellore, right? Data as is from regular operations or service is rarely accurate or complete enough. Andrew earlier said, even in fully digitized ecosystems such as Netherlands, they have found that this may not be good enough, right? So often we find, not often, almost always we find ourselves in some sort of a study mode, either retrospective or prospective, right? I'm yet to really see someone turning on their EMR, building AI, and that working. There's a little asterisk I placed up there, and the reason I placed that asterisk is, yes, it could work, but if you are actually trying to predict maybe operational things that are somehow specific to that particular setting, right? Because whatever that AI is and whatever you're learning, it's learning those characteristics of those particular doctors in those particular populations and in those particular workflows. And so maybe it is good enough to predict certain things, if not at an individual patient level, at least at an overall population level, right? So you could say, oh, okay, let's see how many patients actually recover using this particular treatment in our setting, or what's going to be the load of patients at a certain phase of time, right? Things like that. But if you're talking about individual interventions that really generalized, you probably, if you have an example of where you did not have to do it in study mode, please come to me. I would love to learn about it, right? So now, if you don't take anything else from this presentation, this is the one slide I hope you remember, and I'm going to spend some time on it, right? Now, all AI, all useful AI ultimately has to get into some sort of a workflow, right? Now, for that AI to be useful in the workflow, someone has to take some actions, right? Uh, can I get a mic? Sorry, standing in one place isn't my style. so, so someone has to take some actions. This is not out of thin air, right? Someone is taking a picture, someone is doing a manual entry, someone is doing something for the data to be presented to the AI. I mean, assuming you have this AI already built. I mean, I'm not talking about an AI built, it's not a live AI that is getting updated. That's not what this meant. But you have deployed it, right? And then you get an output, and you use that output to take a decision, and someone takes actions using that decision, and only then you get to an outcome, right? And if you're lucky, you have a system where you can close the loop and get the AI to learn along the way. Now, if you're in the point in patient journey and care pathway is so important, and I can't say enough that I especially find doctors who have spent decades in tertiary care systems not giving enough attention to what happens on the ground, right? So if you expect it to work in an ASHA workers or community health workers' hands, think about the skills, think about the equipment, the settings. Are they in a noisy setting if you want to use cough for screening for something? You want to take a fundus image. Do they actually have a fundus camera? Is it in a dark room? Is an image taken not in a dark room actually good enough? And ultimately, decisions and actions intended. Here, there's another sort of thing that happens often, which is maybe you cannot tell whether it is TB or COVID, but maybe you can just say it is serious enough that it needs a referral of sorts, right? And that's a different type of bar you set. And the kind of decisions and actions you want to take should really align with where you are meeting that patient in the patient journey, right? So now I'm going to rush through the rest of the slides here. Accuracy. I like to use the term accurate enough. I get scared with the term gold standard a little bit, right? Because who decides? What tests do you have, right? And I've seen very experienced ophthalmologists tell me, you know what, this optometrist actually a good job of annotating this, and they're more accurate. I miss stuff that they don't miss, right? How many of them? Adjudicating. And ultimately, all this comes back to purpose, right? And this is something that you need to give fair amount of thought to and expect to change during your project, right? If you are not changing it during your project, and if you say, I really got it upfront, absolutely right, I would worry, right? Completeness. We heard a lot of things today, various types of completeness. Ultimately, you're saying, what are my metadata requirements, right? And that's important for various things. One is searchability, other is explainability. Maybe you can have simply, maybe you can just have an X-ray and some diagnosis. But only if you have pixel level annotation can you really hope for any sort of explainability, right? Or maybe there are other auxiliary tests you need to get. Maybe you need biopsies, right? So you got to think about how expansive you need to be about data based on a lot of these things. Longitudinal data is another dimension of, completeness. Diversity. You see that I don't use the term inclusivity, bias, justice, all those things here. For me, all that stems from purpose, right? And some of it is that one of the key things is that one really has to keep your eye on is the natural distribution of certain conditions versus data set. You will have to overrepresent certain conditions if you want your AI models to do well enough. Just like many of you, if you haven't seen a condition many times in your experience, you probably are going to miss it or don't know how to catch it, right? Same with conditions, stages, people, environment settings, equipment. This is a new one, right? Earlier, Ravi showed that image where you add a little bit of noise to an image that human eye can barely detect, but the machine fails, right? So if you're using an algorithm for image capture, sound capture, etc., on different devices, both the hardware and software matter. The, you know, what's the background signal processing algorithms, right? So this is quite important. So if you're going to do that WhatsApp data collection, think whether that's basically what you want to do or not. Maybe it's good enough, right? Standard specifications. There was a lot of talk about ABDM. This roadmap of standards is incredibly important. One of the biggest reasons things become obsolete is because folks don't keep an eye on what's the environment emerging around them. In India, it's a very fast-changing environment. ABDM and related things are coming in. And standards as specifications are not just digital in nature. Non-digital, right? Turns out it makes a difference how people sit when you take fundus images. Earlier, there was another example someone showed about liver images or something like that, right? There's also a real usefulness drop that happens if all your data is from lab conditions. If you want to deploy this AI in not lab conditions, non-standard conditions, think about what's the variability you should expect. And then think back to how you have to construct your data set. It's not useful enough if you just have high-end equipment, right? If you have the best resolution equipment, well, when you're building your AI and such a resolution image or equipment is not available, make sure you use ML methods in which you probably are desampling that image or compressing that image into something that actually represents your ultimate deployment data, right? So very broadly, we asked the question, can we build a system that will make available appropriate, I won't go through this, purpose-appropriate data by bringing it together from many places in a way that data still remains distributed. And this is something we are trying to do now with ICMR and with alignment of ABDM NHA, Niti Aayog, DBT. There are several of these imaging data banks thing you would have heard about. And what we are trying to do is really build a hubs and spokes model. And while there will be specific institutions that we will enroll as hubs and spokes, I like to think of it more as a virtual model. And it will be a platform as a service model where we are bringing together data from multiple places and as an ongoing thing. Now, the thing with AI is, let's say you validate an algorithm today or in one place. Let's say you validate here in CMC Vellore. Is it now good to go for the rest of that algorithm's life and in all places in the world or in India? So this is the thing, right? So I have a feeling that without a distributed and dynamic system, right, we are in deep trouble when it comes to really deploying AI systems, right? And hence we are trying to architect something as digital public goods, an end-to-end architecture that allows purpose-driven data sets. And we are trying to build this in a way that allows the private sector to participate too. This is an open invitation to everyone to come collaborate with us and help build this. I will leave you with this. Ultimately, why do we do all this? You can look up this Lancet Commission work we did called Reimagined Health Journeys. It's certainly a dream, maybe a far-fetched, but I think we always underestimate how fast we make progress in the long term and overestimate and over-expect the progress we need to make in the short term. Progress is exponential, not linear, right? So when you have an exponential line and a linear line, right, our expectations are linear in nature, so we underestimate what we can achieve. So I think it is important to take the small steps that we need to navigate these challenges, and I'm sure we'll make mistakes, but it's important to get started. So yeah, come work with us, open to questions.
Actually, one question, let's say, as you know that curating data set and annotating medical data set is very tough. That's a practicality, okay? So now, where I can stop, okay, I collected all my data set. Let's say any one image classifier, which I have to do that lung cancer prediction, okay? So now I have to do the data collection. I have enough data set for a deep learning application. Now I have to go for annotation, which is much costlier because of I have to involve a lot of radiologists or doctors. So where I can stop it? Okay, for my model, I have done with this data set.
So I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, let's say I'm trying to build a model for a classifier. It's a deep learning model. I want to collect a data set. I collected enough data set, let's say 20,000 images. I cannot send all the images for the annotations. So how do I define, okay, this data set enough for the classifier?
Look, I quite don't know exactly what you'll need to do in this case. Maybe you'll have to annotate some images and see whether you can actually, use that to annotate rest of your images and well, that's actually good enough in some way, right? Now what to do, a lot of these things will depend on your budget and who you can afford, right? So that's the practical answer, right? So I also think that I would ask, as you collect this data set, given the problem you're trying, I go back to why are you collecting this data set? You want to build some solution?
Yes.
Does such solution already exist?
No.
Right. So which means then it seems like if the problem is worth solving, I would go look out for funding, right? To get the additional annotations you need. And if you're already in a setup where you're able to get your data, the only thing I can think of is, are you based at CMC Vellore?
No. I am from Beckman. I'm a ML engineer.
Okay, you're an ML engineer. All right. So find some CMC Vellore folks in the room. All right, got it. Okay. I was very puzzled that you're from CMC Vellore telling me you don't know how to annotate these things. So sorry, I was very puzzled.
Any other questions? Yeah. Thank you, sir. We close the session.
Thank you.